101.1 FM, AM 1160, WCCSradio.com. Mr. Bob Pollock from the Extension is on the line with us here this morning. And our conversation brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Mr. Bob, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, we've got another strange weather circumstance happening around our area. It's snow right now and slush, and we're going to get into a deep freeze. And then next week, we're going to actually, by the end of the week, warm up to near 50 degrees. It's the January yo-yo, and obviously that has an impact on what our lawns and our gardens and trees are dealing with. Do they feel particular stress when the weather gets like that, when it's back and forth like that?
Absolutely. Even, of course, we've got a lot of different types of plants. We've got evergreens, which still have their needles or their foliage on, all year around. Rhododendrons. So there's a rhododendrons, big-leafed plant, that still has that live living foliage on there year-round, versus a needled evergreen. So those plants are still functioning a little bit, and they can feel the effects of these swings in temperature and ups and downs. A yo-yo, that's a good way to put that, more so than plants that lose their foliage and are able to go completely dormant. We've had a pretty good, entrance into winter where we've been fairly consistent. We haven't been extremely cold, but at least it's been cold. We go down in the 20s at night, and we may make it up in the 30s or maybe hit a 40 during the day. And so those aren't too big of fluctuations to deal with for plants. And they went in, kind of on a gradual scale, able to winterize themselves, essentially, to get prepared. It's when we start to get those periods where we jump out of that and maybe bounce up to 50 degrees and have a 30, 40, 50-degree temperature swing in 24 to 48 hours, that's where we get into trouble, and plants get into trouble, because they may deacclimatize and then they can't reacclimatize quick enough, to handle that. Mm-hmm. Essentially, their antifreeze in there isn't concentrated enough, and they lose it, and they can't get it back fast enough, and that's when we can get damage. So then that might show up months later. You might get the bark cracks on the tree, so it actually, the cells freeze, and then they burst because they have liquid in them, and then that can lead to, splitting, killing of that area on a branch or on a trunk. A lot of times that happens to younger plants that have thinner bark versus, well-established trees and shrubs that have thicker bark, and able to handle that. So, yeah, these things, having snow cover is to our benefit, right? Uh-huh. Because snow is an insulator. So getting snow before we go into those wide fluctuations is very helpful, because it kind of insulates those perennial plants or plants that are newer that we maybe established, planted within the last year or two. Mm-hmm. And they may not have, gotten a good enough root system developed yet to really get them established and well anchored to the ground. So, yeah, snow can be a good benefit in these times.
I have a shrub I wanted to ask you about. I noticed this the other day. It has about 1 inch oval or maybe even football-shaped leaves on it, and every year those leaves drop off in the fall, and they come back in the spring. This year, it hung onto its leaves, and I noticed the other day that plant still has its leaves. They didn't drop off. How unusual is that, and is that a sign of some danger for that plant, or just coincidental, and are new leaves going to come on and replace those in the fall or in the spring?
Yeah, some plants, sometimes they won't, that layer where that leaf is attached to the branch doesn't always, cut itself off or terminate itself as easily as it does. It might have been, that plant may have been growing longer into the fall, and so it just didn't quite. It's still hanging on to them. They're probably, they're dead. They're died, but they just haven't made that sever there to cut them off and that they drop.
They're zombie leaves now.
Yeah, and and all it might take is, you might be able to go out there and snap them off, or we get snow and if it's heavy, wet enough, and it clings to them, that might finish it off, and some more of those will come down. But yeah, some plants do vary in how long they might hold. Some of the oak trees will hold their leaves all winter.
Yeah.
And they'll, keep shedding little bits at a time, and finally by spring, they'll either all be gone, or as new growth comes out and the buds, because the buds for next year are already there on our plants. So those were formed late summer into fall, and so they're there, ready to go for next year. And unless we get a killing event, sometime during the winter months or early spring, where those buds get damaged, they're going to leaf back out again in the spring.
Yeah. I also had a question somebody asked me to ask you. It was, hey, next time you're talking to Bob, ask him this. And this is somebody who uses weed killer in their driveway and their sidewalk, and I don't know that they use them in any other application. I don't know that they do a weed and feed, but they were wondering about just on a basic residential lawn and the areas around that lawn when you're using the chemical weed killers. Is that harmful to the environment, to the water nearby, or anything like that, or is the concentration just not enough?
Okay, there's a lot in that question. Every material or chemical that we use, whether it be a natural compound or a man-made compound, has its own characteristics. And if you look up those individual active ingredients, and is it a product that has a single active ingredient? Is it a product that has 2 or 3 different active ingredients? Many of the broadleafed lawn weed killers have 2 or 3 active ingredients in that one container. So you got to look at each one of those individually and look up the chemistry of that. And on all these products that have gone through the regulatory process and are labeled for use, you can look that up, and you can see what are its characteristics. How long will it survive in the environment? And there's testing that's done to indicate that. What are its effects on vertebrates and invertebrates? Is it a material that will bind and stay where it's put? Is it one that's highly water-soluble and has the potential to move? So we have to look at each one. We cannot blanketly say everything's okay or everything's not okay. Very dependent on the particular compound that we're talking about.
Yeah, well,
and
I'm
its
guessing,
advantages and disadvantages.
I'm guessing if this person were to do a roundup of all of the different chemicals they use, he would come up with what is basically orthodox.
And the other thing, once you apply a material, many of the materials that are available today are pretty short-lived. They don't have a long, what they call half-life, and that's the time it takes for that product to be 50% degraded. And as soon as they're applied, you have some products are easily broken down just by sunshine, others in the presence of moisture, and then all the microbes that are in the soil, from bacteria to fungi and all those, can also have effect on these compounds, their chemistry. And so they start to break down. So some can be very short-lived. Others are very stable where you put them, and then they take action on the, if we're talking about a weed killer, they control that particular plant or plants we're trying to control, and then, within a week or 2 weeks, they may be gone. All the various sources that are working on them will break them down back into those compounds that were originally put together to make them. Now, there are exceptions to that. There are products, especially as you go back in history, that, when you go into when things started building up, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, there are compounds that are very long-lived. Many of those active ingredients are no longer labeled, at least for use in the United States. We can't, other countries still use some things that we don't use anymore. But yeah, anyway, that's it's a complicated thing.
So you got to read those labels.
You got to read the labels. You got to understand what you're doing. You can't always believe what you hear. There've been certain compounds that get attacked. And it's on the media, and there's lawsuits, and there's all this stuff, and you can't assume that what they're saying's all been presented to you. You need to dig into that deeper and take a closer look at it.
All right. Well, that is a rather complicated answer, but it was a complicated question, and
it is a complicated question.
It requires personal research, and so
yes.
Before you use it, research the label and maybe go online as well. And don't just rely upon the lawyer's commercial on TV. Thank you, Robert, for the visit this morning.
You're welcome.
Be safe.
You too.
There's Bob Pollock from the Extension Service. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCS Radio.